Hello, this is the kubeadm office hours by Sequest Lifecycle. Today is the 12th of February 2020. Please add your names to the list of participants and your agenda topics to the agenda document. I'm going to share my screen. Let me close this first. All right. I don't have any PSAs. Does anybody have anything in terms of announcements? All right, so this is the first topic I wanted us to discuss. We have a survey plan for KubeCon, and I wanted to maybe get some feedback from the group in terms of what topics you want to cover in the new survey. So this document here is provides the initial guideline for this new format of the survey. The TLDR is that we're going to mix all the sub-projects of Sequest Lifecycle that want to send questions to the survey in the same form. For kubeadm specifically, I guess we have to think about unique kubeadm questions, or maybe questions that we want to recycle from the old survey. But what I'm talking about is that we have to cover some specifics to kubeadm, for instance, related to the upgrade process, or specifics to kubeadm. The format is going to be such that we also have a general question section, and basically in here we're going to list some of the questions that are important to the whole list of sub-projects. And I think the Coaster API already have some questions that are pretty generic, so I think we have to revisit with them what is really unique for the Coaster API project. We have the same for kubeadm. This is the link, I guess. Our old survey included some actually this is so this is
if I can chime in. So I created the kubeadm version starting from the cluster API version. And I added some questions for the general part, and they are highlighted in blue, the delta in blue. And I added below the general part some kubeadm specific questions.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that you were editing this. Okay. I think we should move the generic questions pretty much out of both the Coaster API draft and the kubeadm draft. And but I realized that I don't have access to this, the Coaster API doc. I guess Vince has access. But what we can do is we can, I think we should start editing this document instead with the generic questions, and then not edit in separate documents. That's my point.
Makes sense. You can grab the generic question from mine and move in the main one.
Okay. So you added these three, I guess.
Yes, I had some question about high availability, about air gapped, and about conformance test, because this was one of the questions in the former questionnaire. And also, if you scroll down, I guess that I added some other question about the operating system, about mixed architecture node, about CNI, CRI, about how the image preparation is done, which is something that is interesting also for the image builder project. And if you go down, there will be something more else. Okay, this section is a section about specific question for kubeadm. And the question is are derived from the former survey that we did. I just reproposed some question in order to try to get basically a feedback from the user in terms of what is important for the user. So I asked the user, please sort by importance the current kubeadm features. Tell me what is more usable, less usable. I don't know if it is this one is a good approach or not, but it's open for discussion. And also, I have some question where I try to understand what is the approach for the user approach for the change the cluster story. So if they're using kubeadm, they are using other nodes, or if they go for immutability. And then I try to understand what is the need, what are the need for the user for the change the cluster story, because in my opinion this is the area of kubeadm that we have to address, and I would like to understand what are the priorities for the users. Does this make sense?
Yes. So can this be unified with this question and this one? Can it be the same question? Because if they respond that they're interested to one of these, they obviously need the kubeadm operator, because the kubeadm operator is our answer to these demands.
Sure. Even if okay, they can be unified. I'm just I tried to not give the answers, to write the question in a way that I'm not suggesting the answer to the user, but okay, we can do a quick session and review the question together. And
yeah, thank you. I didn't know that you already started on this. So today I'm going to, I guess, copy this into the main document, and if others want to contribute questions and answers, they can do it in this doc, I guess. My only concern is that if this is a sequence life cycle survey, are like the rest of the projects going to contribute here? Because for Cluster API and kubeadm, we are probably going to draft the initiative properly, but for the rest, it might be a bit difficult. But yeah, in terms of kubeadm, we can also cover some of the, a question in particular that I really liked in the previous survey was, like, please rate your overall user experience with 1 to 5. I really like this one, because looking at the graph later, it tells me how are we progressing between the surveys. Yeah, this one, like the UX overall, I think this was very nice. And maybe we should include it again.
yeah, my only concern is that being a cluster lifecycle survey, at the end we can for the sub project we can have only a limited number of sessions. Otherwise, the surveys take too long.
Yeah. Then again, we cannot really cap to a fixed number. We have to evaluate later if we just have too many questions. I think the Costa Rica currently don't have that many questions. Most of their questions were fairly generic. For kubeadm, I can think of some that are for Costa Rica, for instance. We can have the same like this. Like, what is the UX? What is your UX experience with some of the tools that in the Costa Rica repository? How do you rate the UX around Costa Rica? I think we have the same for Costa Rica. I'm going to try to sell this to others.
Yeah, it makes sense to have all the project-specific sessions start in the same way.
Mm-hmm. High availability. One of our questions from before can go into the general section, I guess. I'm also interested in the Windows support, if this is going to, the percentage of people are going to increase, maybe. Upgrades and testing, this is for the generic section. Rate your experience. So this is something that maybe we should leave out because multiple groups of Kubernetes decided to do a survey. So we have a LTS survey, we have a production readiness survey, and now we're going to have a cost lifecycle survey. And all of them are asking this question, like the LTS. Do you want the LTS?
I'm +1 for removing this question.
Yeah, I think we should leave this to the LTS group if because they want to. But there was also the proposal to merge the surveys. So the LTS group can send us something like 5 questions, and I said immediately that, hey, this is not really appropriate because we're going to talk about deployers in our survey. And but still, if they want to add some LTS questions, maybe we can try to approve their proposal. I just want to look at the questions first, because if it's too much digging into LTS, maybe it's not appropriate for our group.
Okay, may make sense for me.
All right. Do the others have any comments on this?
So I'll also try to see the existing questions, and we'll probably add 1 or 2 more, or contribute to the existing ones. Mainly, I want to see some questions around what do people think on basically on a feature basis of kubeadm, so we can have a more accurate predictions and more accurate positioning of priorities for the next few cycles.
Yes, specifically around component config, we already had some basic coverage of how is the UX around component config, I think, this one.
Yeah, and it's not only component config, it's also basically CLI and for example, other stuff like advanced configurations and all sorts of things.
Okay. So I'm going to move the question and answers from here, like after the meeting, probably immediately. I think you should draft in here, to be honest, in this doc.
One thing to add on the questions that I think Fabrizio was writing down. If I remember correctly, there was one about sorting for importance of the component. Is that right? Something like that. And to me, that sounded like a question that can be interpreted in multiple ways, right? What does it mean importance for different people can mean different things. So I think we should be careful when we phrase the question. Not because I mean the question is relevant, but we may get different results depending on the people, so the result may be inconsistent, if you know what I mean. So I think the question is important. Maybe adding what importance mean in that context may help a little bit.
Makes sense for me. To be honest, I'm not even sure if sorting things is supported by the tools that we are using, but
yeah, you possibly can vote, right? You can still vote from 0 to 5 and say how important is this in compared to the others. Maybe there is a platform to do the same type of analysis.
Another way is to just provide each of the options with a tick box, and users can basically tick whatever they like, and obviously the most voted for option is going to have the most ticks.
You lose some information that way though, because they can only vote for, well, no, they can vote for more than one, but you lose the ordering, let's say. But it does make sense.
I think that we will do the best that the tool support. The idea is that to try to understand on which feature we have to invest the most in terms of energy and improvements and so on and so forth.
This one produces the best graph. That is, you scale the importance with 1 to 5.
What you just said, Fabrizio, is interesting, because that wasn't my interpretation of the question, right? You just say that you want to know which feature we should put more effort on, if I'm correct, right? So it may actually be the opposite of what people are going to vote, because they may find more useful or more important a feature, but they may think that a feature needs more attention. Another feature needs more attention. If I mean,
no, I got your point. We have to be careful in writing the question. Just as a suggestion, Lubomir, just give 4 values in a scale, not 5. So the people is forced to express positive or negative instead of staying in the middle.
yeah, +1 on that.
But that way, we may also need to have a not applicable value, simply because they didn't use some feature. So for example, if a user hasn't used kubeadm to deploy HA clusters, they would obviously not be able to give qualified opinion on the HA question.
But probably, are they forced to tick every line?
Yes.
Oh,
okay. Then give an NA. So there are two we are getting into detail of the forms. So there is a concern that you can't really read what it is on the left, and so we should let me say reduce the number of options. Maybe give only 3 options and an A or whatever.
I think this is just a visual problem. Let me move this stuff just a second.
Yeah, but we can make a separate session and try to and deal with the tools separately. I don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any other agenda. Does anybody?
I would like to. I have a topic to discuss, which is with regards to the to the component config.
I have one too about the issue that I was meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah, please add your items to the agenda. That was.
Yeah, it's already there, I think. I hope I added in the right place. As the above one. Possible implementation for issue.
Okay.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay. But Fabrizio can go first because you were saying you had an item too.
No, please go, Luca. I start writing mine in the meantime.
Okay, cool. So it's just the last comment there. I want to be sure that I'm going the right direction before starting even implementing it. This is about the kubeadm config images pool, and the person that opened this issue was reporting that in this situation, when the config is already in the cluster and you're using an external etcd, the command is going to pull down the etcd images even if it's not needed because you're using an external etcd. And that's because apparently the command right now is not reading the state, the configuration of the cluster, but is already using the --config and ignoring whatever state of the cluster config is. So there was already a similar implementation for these done on the certs command that was done by Fabrizio, and that's the first link in my comment. And my proposal is to take that piece of code, move it in a more general file, it may be the config util, the part there, the config util, because it's general enough to possibly use in other places, and then use the same logic in the image pool command.
You're suggesting to move this function as a public utility?
Yes. I mean, considering that we're going to use this logic in 2 commands already, and possibly in more. I don't know if in the future there is a plan to enable more commands to read the cluster config. I mean, we're gonna, if we decide to go that way, and I think we decided for that, we're gonna use this function already, or the same logic, let's say, in 2 places already.
So this calls what or default init configuration directly from there. So what is the difference? This also calls it, but before that it checks.
Yeah, it's also, so what this does, it tries to see if you're passing a config. If you're not passing a config, it's gonna try to load the configuration from the cluster. And if the configuration of the cluster is not there, so you get an error, it's going to default back into the normal behavior that is loading the loading the init configuration from cluster, and or load the default init configuration. Probably, if you open the link on the comments above, the one that shows the diff of what Fabrizio has implemented, is going to be clear. But it's just adding the part of fetching the config from the cluster, if I read it correctly.
This function, maybe the name should be get init configuration from file or cluster.
Yeah, possibly. We can rename that function for sure. It's but yeah, the first comment there, it actually explains that, right? In case the user is not providing a custom config, try to get the current config from the cluster.
Yeah, I think this is fine. What do others think?
I'm fine as long as it has a huge command that basically says use it very carefully, simply because this is opening slightly the genie bottle here. This basically is what kubeadm upgrade apply minus config does, and we don't want it to be spread all over kubeadm. But in the case of image pre-pooling, I think it's okay.
But there was a comment in the original PR for this change here, and the comment was about these can actually bring us weird side effect in case you cannot reach the cluster API server to fetch the config, right? Because you're gonna fall into the path of loading a default config. So in case you try to do these, and that's I think the worst side effect that can happen in this case, you try to fetch the configuration from the cluster, you fail for any other reason except the one that the cluster is not there, right? and you end up loading the default config with all the repercussion of doing that. But since we're only talking about the image pull command, I mean, it's probably gonna mean only that you're gonna pull more images than what you think is gonna be required. So I agree on the huge comment though.
Yeah, my main objection to this feature request was that it applies only to the cases when users have already created a cluster, and originally the command for kubeadm config images pull and list was designed for air-backed scenarios. So you don't have a cluster, yet. And now we have a cluster. The argument is that it's useful during upgrades, but I fail to see the point. The user gave a pretty good explanation in general, but I just don't want us to fall this into the trap of exposing the init configuration to all the commands for a good reason.
Can't comment on that, so I'm going to leave someone else there.
And I think that this was raised like back in the day, and I think that what we were telling users to do is just fetch the component config from the cluster and then rerun it from a local file.
I think that since the discussion about this config with this function that basically works at the best effort is really specific to the command, I'm +1 for duplicating this logic in the two command and giving an explanation why we are doing this, which is best effort, instead of moving the function in a utility, and then it is difficult to understand why we are working at best effort and so on and so forth. But I have no strong opinion. It's just a matter that I prefer being clear than saving five line of code. So.
In that case, would you put the link of the two functions in the respective files, saying this is duplicated here and this is duplicated in the other places? Because the risk there is that someone is going to apply the patch to that function in the future, is going to forget about the other one, or I mean the other way around. I mean that works for me. I have no issue with that.
It makes sense for it in config utils. I think if you're going to make the change, it should not be under CMD.
Okay, let's have a function in config util and document it well that it works at best effort for accommodate the use case of a command that can be executed when the cluster does not exist or when the cluster exists.
Do we have other commands that may need this in the future? I don't think we have. No, it's only the images and the certificate renewal.
I know that the image list is already doing something like that, I think, because I saw a test that is testing also for the scenario where the TCD is external. So I don't know if what's the logic in the image list command, but I suppose it's doing something similar. Or maybe it's doing, I don't know.
The image list takes a bunch of hard-coded image values.
Okay, so that is only going to be reading that from the config file then, or from the -- config, I suppose, input file.
Yes, but it uses the -- config the user provides, because based on the Kubernetes version inside the config, it's going to update the tags in the list.
Mm.
So if you feed 117 as the tag version, is going to use it to populate the list for the control plane images in kubeproxy with that version.
And that command would never make sense to be run when the cluster is already there and reading the config from the cluster.
It doesn't make sense to me, but it might make sense to someone else.
I'm just thinking if there is a use case. I never used the command, so I'm totally ignorant here.
For consistency, So here is the tricky part. If you don't feed --config to list, this is going to tell kubeadm config images list to use the default version for the images and not the version that is stored in the cluster. So it's using the version of the kubeadm binary and not the version in the cluster. I think we should preserve this functionality because it's actually a breaking change if we change the assumption here. So and then it becomes a question like, why are we applying the similar assumption to the --config for pool? It's I was really against the original feature request, and I just don't see consistency between the image list and image pool commands in this case.
But the original one was not the alpha cert command.
Yeah, but so the original discussion about consistency was with the alpha cert command. But now I'm seeing the inconsistency between list and pool if we make this change to pool. If you feed --config to list, and if you don't feed --config to list, the question is, do we pull the version from the cluster or default to the kubeadm version in the binary, to the Kubernetes version in the binary? That's, I think we should.
Yeah, I can see what you mean there.
Having inconsistency between a couple of subcommands to be able to be consistent with a separate command is very strange to me.
And there is actually a comment from the person opening the issue. You were already discussing that in the issue itself, where he's actually saying that it's more important that image pool is consistent with the upgrade and the other commands, I think, that with image than with image list. But he was also saying that that's just an opinion, and I understand your point. So
the workaround for this problem / feature is very simple. The user, they can just, so let me try to recollect the exact issue or origin here. So the user wants to be able to determine if the HCD image is external. So if the external HCD is configured. And what happens if you pull these extra 40 megabytes? I don't see the main problem here, to be honest. You can always pass the --config, and in this case, kubeadm is not going to pull the HCD image because you tell it, hey, I have an external HCD, I don't care about the HCD image. But the user wants to not pass --config and use the config in the cluster. I'm really starting to develop an objection against this feature request at this point.
I can see the use case. If you're managing multiple clusters, you may not know which cluster has the external TCD or internal TCD. So having the command to do the right things is a nice bonus, let's say. I also see your reasoning about the list and the pool that should behave consistently with each other. And I also see that changing this, you have a breaking change in the list because you get a different behavior if the cluster is it's crazy. So I have rejection from both, and I mean a reason for both. I don't know. I mean, it's really up to you here.
Yeah, I'm adding a -1.
I personally don't see a big problem here because according to the discussion, the use case was that the user want to prepare an upgrade, and it is nice when preparing an upgrade that the two commands work according with the current cluster configuration. But it is really nice to have because I can argue that, okay, before doing upgrade, nevertheless you have to grab the config and upgrade it and change the release. So in my opinion, it's not a problem to give this behavior, because at the end, most of the user will pass the config. And
I think what we need here is an extra flag, to be honest. If we are going to do this, we need an extra flag that is giving the determinism of where are we going to use, from where are we going to fetch basically the details. If you pass -- config to list, it's fine. You're going to use this config. You are explicitly providing it, but if you also pass -- config and some extra flag saying no, so we only need the determinism for the list command, which is very strange. The determinism for the list command is needed because if you pass, it's not very clear to me what you're going to do with the list command.
So
I propose to table the discussion and address this offline. Yes.
Yeah, just everybody should add comments to the tickets. I mean, I don't want to add my -1 because I think I added it again before. It just the workarounds are very simple here. That's my, yeah.
I was also going to say that probably there is a bigger discussion about because I see three configs here, three possible source of configuration, right? There is the default one, there's the -- config, and now there's the cluster config. So I sort of agree with Lubomir here that we may require something that is a little bit more explicit to be clear on the behavior of the command, where you say either the order of precedence, how do you want to apply this, right? Or something to say, I want to use the internal cluster config if possible. I don't know, something like that. So I agree on the fact that probably another flag is needed in order to at least remove this uncertainty of which config you're going to use.
In the other PR, the priority is -- config, cluster, and default. And if someone wants to override the priority, he can pass -- config. So.
And where are we documenting this precedence? That's the question. Because people are going to suddenly, if we change list, people are going to start asking us, like, why? What was the first element in the precedence?
Config.
So first,
the - config.
Okay, and then is the configuration from the cluster.
Yeah, but that is best effort. So that's also another behavior, right? So if you cannot reach the API server, you're going to go in default. So even that may be tricky. Instead, with an extra parameter, you may say, I want the one in the cluster. If it's not there, you either fail or then you fall back on something. So I don't know.
What is going to be the precedence for the list command in terms of Kubernetes version?
So I think that we should probably table this right now because we are running out of time. And I think that we are getting into details that we should probably check up the bigger picture, because we may, for example, connect to an API server and fetch an old config that was pre-kubeadm upgrade apply and basically refetch the already running images. So I think that we should probably do some more researching in here.
All right, let's move to the next one. Fabrizio, you wanted to discuss component config?
Yeah, Ross is driving an effort to try to make kubeadm somehow resilient to the fact that there is no upgrade path for the component config. And my question is that is trying to understand if we expect that. Sorry, there is an echo. Thanks. So my question is that should we expect blocking upgrade path in the next release? And if yes, should we start in discussing this with, I don't know, in the broader cluster API groups, so people get informed that probably their upgrade will be blocked?
No, as far as we don't have any upgraded component configs yet, we won't expect that. Probably, well, the thing that is probably going to cause some concerns in the somewhat near to mid future is if v1 alpha 2 of kubeproxy appears. But so far we are only dealing with kubelets and kubeproxy's component configs, and I think that kubelets probably is not going to get into beta 2. But that also depends into how the instance versus shared component configs stuff goes, because I think that Mike is trying to get the instance specific versus shared specific cap merged and to implement an instance specific component config for the kubelet, simply because there are a large number of command line parameters that he wants to put in a component config, and those are instance specific at the moment.
Okay, so if I got it right, is we are not expecting new release of component config to be created this cycle, and
Yep.
while the next in the future, we are expecting that kubelet will not only create a new release, but also shift to something different that is instance versus shared config.
Well, we need to check with API machinery policies, but I think that probably this is going to introduce probably a new kind to the kubelet's component config, which is instance specific kind. And this is probably going to lead into a new version being released for it. So I don't think that you can retrofit the second kind, even though it doesn't collide with the previous configuration.
Okay.
Absolutely, they have to release a new version with the new kind.
And when they release the new version?
It's not clear yet.
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, I was just, when they release the new version, are they defining an upgrade part or not? That's the real point.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone in the kubelet community knows right now. Probably Mike has some plan. I'm not sure whether they are actually going to release this config soon, or if they are trying to avoid releasing it by simply adding another kind to the existing beta one. So, but this is something that can possibly surprise us in the next 1 or 2 cycles, but certainly not in this one. The cap hasn't merged yet.
Yeah, my major concern is that, okay, one of the expectation of the component config was to, okay, let's start using API machinery instead of Flex, so we have all the goodness of API machinery, but we are not using upgrades. So we are really badly failing in the promises. But I got your point that we should not expect problem for this cycle. So we are just let me say getting ready in kubeadmin, but things it is not a problem yet. And let's see what happened in kubelet for the instance specific things, and what happened in the kubeproxy, even if I think that also in kubeproxy the instance specific versus shared problem applies.
Yeah, this was also part of my initial version of the cap for graduating kubeproxy's component config to beta. In the current version that is merged, it it isn't. Currently, I have some preliminary version of Alpha 2 for kubeproxy, but I'm deliberately not publishing it simply because it's not a major upgrade over Alpha 1. It's just several fields being reshuffled, and this is probably going to cause users bigger issues, for example, having to do manual upgrades than actually giving them a benefit of a slightly better structure. So having an instance versus shared specific cap merged would also allow me to upgrade the Alpha 2 proposal with that cap 2. So this may actually require releasing an Alpha 2 somewhere in the next cycles.
I just wanted to add that the upgrade for component config is an API machinery problem that is going to persist for multiple releases. It's not going to be solved anytime soon. If we have some public YAML files, public config YAML files stored on disk somewhere, there's not going to be any way to convert them to the next version. So if you have kubelet v1 beta 1 that is currently a monolith, if you split it in the future into multiple parts, as a user of the public types, you're not going to be able to upconvert to this YAML document with multiple parts. So you have to do it manually. This is really a problem for Cluster API, it's a problem for kubeadm, for all consumers of the kubelet. Until components start exposing conversion endpoints on the CLI or services.
Yeah, but there is also, this is one side of the coin. The other side is that most of the users don't actually specify their own component configs. They actually look into kubeadm to actually generate a component config and generate an opinionated component config to be able to run this component. So what I'm proposing and what my PR that you actually both took a look in the past few days is that we should probably sign such configs, which we actually generated via kubeadm, so we can actually check that those were not modified or not supplied by an end user. And we can simply throw them away if we have to upgrade and generate a new one. Simply because we know what we generated in the past versions, we can generate a compatible thing. The thing here comes with what users should do when they actually supply their own configs. And in those cases, I think that it's probably better to just leave the user to do the conversion manually. Simply because I don't think that users are probably going to trust us too much to do the conversion automatically. This is probably going to affect just users that supplied some simple overrides of one or two fields in the component config, and those are the users that are going to be impacted the most, simply because they just edited something that the kubeadm doesn't expose as an option. And now they're forced to go in and poke into some config map somewhere to edit it again and convert it to a newer version.
I think a definite question for the survey is going to be, do you modify kubeproxy or kubelet fields? And if we see something like 30% of people doing that, we still have a major problem.
Yeah, I think that this is a nice question to have.
I think that this is one. The problem is big because I consider that today the majority of the user of kubeadm are shifting from being a personal individual user, from being a higher level tool like Cluster API or Kind or Minikube. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that all of these tools that leverage on kubeadm are using, are customizing the component config.
Yeah, and I think that in that case, they should probably took kubeadm stance on component config. So they should probably stamp somehow the configs that they actually generated. And basically just check that if the stampage is valid, then they're free to throw away that config because it is the config that they actually generated. Or if they have some means by which users can actually supply an override config, they can ask the user again.
I was also wondering about the generic question of how to create a forcing function for API machinery to approve our proposal for exposing conversion. And the survey can provide a question in the lines of, hey, do you want Kubernetes to convert your YAML files and with your supervision, of course? And if we get a lot of responses to the survey question, we can show this to API machinery and they have to approve it, because I don't think they currently respect our opinion because we don't have the data. That's my position on the problem.
Yeah, and we don't have the data because we haven't actually run yet into the problem. And when we actually run into the problem, this is going to be pretty late for our users.
Yes, once imagine in the distant future, the API server has component config that is graduated to V1. This means that it may have passed multiple stages of alpha, beta. If you ask the users to modify all those flags manually, they're going to have a problem. They might lose options. They might misconfigure their API server. I think that this conversion is something that the API machinery is not seeing yet. I agree.
Okay, my proposal is to raise the point to the next SIG cluster lifecycle meeting.
In terms of what?
Basically, making present, making all the sub-project aware that this will be a problem impacting the user and the high level tools, and we should stand as a SIG. Table the discussion start a discussion with Kubernetes API machinery.
Yes, makes sense to have a discussion with everyone in the sequence lifecycle meeting, I guess. Yeah, it's a big problem, and I don't want to sound pessimistic, but this is a problem that other projects have not found the solution for. So just wanted to give you a warning that it's not an easy problem to solve.
No, I'm not telling. I'm not telling that it is an easy one. I want just to create awareness around the problem, so there is not expectation that Kubernetes can solve this problem alone, because this is not doable.
Yeah, I think that whatever solution we end up with has to originate from somewhere. I quite I see that kubeadm might be the driver again for this, because we are going to face the problem first, maybe.
Yeah, unfortunately, Kubernetes is a pioneer in using this kind of solution, and it is a pioneer in facing this problem. So this is why I want to make the other aware.
We are pioneering everything, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we are also the first in the chain of component configs. So the cluster API folks are the next ones.
Yes. Okay. I think that we are at the end of the time. So
Right. Let's continue next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.